Order, Education Committee, May 9th, 2023. I'd like to welcome the members of the Education Committee, Louis Alford, Mylan Blake, Bill Winters, Tim Mason. Also like to welcome Chairman Tom Cry, Dr. Cash, Susan, Ellen, Adam from the Mayor's Office, Josh Taylor from the Board of Education, Grant from the Banner. So I'd like to review the minutes on page 2 and 3 from our February 16th meeting that we had, and then I'll be looking for a motion to approve those minutes. And if I could remind you when you speak, if you would please turn your microphone on. Basically, at our last meeting, Dr. Cash reviewed the third grade literacy law with us. We talked about the Pi Center.
Make that motion.
Second.
Accept it.
I have a first from Commissioner Alford and a second from Commissioner Winters. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. No opposition. Okay, the next item on our agenda is item A, and that is the fiscal 2023-24 budget proposal. And I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Cash and to Susan.
First, just thank you for allowing us to be here and to share with you our budget proposal. We did present last week to our board and are honored to do so for you as well. And I will turn this over to Ms. Wilcutt and let her start going through the information so that we can let you have any questions you have.
Thank you, Dr. Cash, and thank you, committee. I'm always honored to stand before you guys. You are such a great support for our school system, and so we are always excited about getting to talk to you and answer any questions that you may have. And with that, if it's okay with you, I will just go through the PowerPoint that we presented to the board last week, and then we will be open for any questions or concerns that you see in the middle of that. FY24 will be a year of monumental changes for our school district. TISA will replace BEP as the state funding model. Although the BEP formula presented many challenges, we were accustomed to how it worked. With TISA, there are many unknowns, but one major difference is that BEP was intended to only meet basic educational program needs, while TISA's intent is to fund much more than the basics. And this is just a little bit of comparison in the way that my mind comprehended kind of when the info came out. BEP was intended to provide basic education needs. It was based on ADMs, or average daily membership, but the formula allocated for things such as instruction, benefits, classroom expenditures, and non-classroom expenditures. More simply put, it provided the basic things we needed to operate schools. TISA is also based on ADMs for our base funding, but everything else in the funding formula relates to the specific needs of each student. So we start with a base of $6,860 per student, and then they have determined weights that range between 15 and 150%. A couple of examples that I listed are like for economically disadvantaged students or students with what they call unique learning needs. Then we go to direct allocation, and those are more for elements that go above regular instruction, like for instance CTE programs and K-3 students. And the very last piece of that is outcomes-based. Those outcomes are determined by the Department of Education, and they can change like from year to year because they are voted on through a committee. And this is just a little visual that I thought helped me kind of think about that, and it really just summarizes what I just said on the previous slide. But if you start at the very bottom, you can see the base, again, is $6,860 per student, and it requires a state and local split. It covers the essentials each student needs for a K-12 education. And then you go to the weights, the second level. It provides additional funds for students with unique learning needs or who may need additional supports. Again, that requires a state and local split. Then when you move up to the third level for direct funding, that offers students learning opportunities beyond everyday classroom instruction. And you'll notice that that particular funding is 100% state funded. And then at the very top are your outcomes funding. Those are to be determined, but again, it is 100% state funded, and it incentivizes student achievement and education excellence. So now let's look at our sources of revenue. So our state revenue, our April TISA estimate was $89,100,297. Based on our fiscal capacity estimates, the state's portion of that will be $68,801,634. And when I first saw these figures, I was concerned because of what that was going to do to the local dollars. And so when I saw what the local match had to be, and it was only a little over $20 million, I'll go back just a minute, because if you look, what explains that basically are those top two areas being 100% state funded. So the local state split does not come into play in those top two areas. So when we get to our local revenue, and of course this will come as no surprise to anyone in this room because we've been talking about this for a long time, but we are projecting that FY24 property tax will remain the same as our FY23 actuals. Make sure you understand we're talking about actuals. The reason we do not expect any increase is due to the equalization ratio being applied by the state. This occurs every 4 years, but the rate is usually much lower. After discussions with the mayor, we are projecting growth, but we anticipate the 28.05% equalization ratio will negate any additional revenue from that growth. Like I said, I know this is not news to anyone in here, but do you have any questions or anything you want me to stop here for? Okay. Better news, we are projecting the FY24 local option sales tax will increase by 5.57% over current year actuals. That number is calculated based on historical growth and the current economic market. We are projecting our payment in lieu of taxes to be reduced by about $70,671 from the current year actuals due to a decrease in assessment values and personal property depreciation. So let's talk a little bit about average daily attendance. And most people here are very familiar with the county-city split. And that is very important to us. This number has historically been a snapshot of the ADAs for the first 3 20-day periods, and we believe that process is being continued. Keep in mind that this number is not only dependent on our attendance and the timely and accurate coding of CTE and SPED students, but it is also dependent on the same criteria at the city. And that's what really is a challenge for us, because although we can monitor how we're doing at our system, we don't know until the state sends the numbers how we fare against the city. So we have no way of knowing what they're doing. Our new weighted ADA numbers are down by 0.33%. While that doesn't sound like much, the adjustment for this year cost the district around $142,879 spread across local revenues. And keep in mind, when we get trued up around March or April, that also gives us time to use that percentage to project our new revenue. So if you look at it in that aspect, it costs us about $142 this year that we had to true up, but it also affected next year's projections by about that amount. And I always like to share these pie charts just to give you kind of a visual of what our revenue looks like. You can see the purple piece of the pie is the state piece, which is at 67.65%. The local revenue makes up 32.19%, and that itty bitty white line is 0.16%. Federal, that is not our federal projects budget. This is purely our ROTC program that the federal money pays for, but it runs through our general purpose budget. And then I thought you would be interested to see how local revenue, I know you know all of this, but I just think looking at it, it just sticks with me a little bit better. So if you look at this one, sales tax is actually making up 59.13% of our local revenue. Property tax makes up 37.32%, and all other local revenue makes up 3.55%. If you look at our expenditures, something that we always like to make sure that everyone is aware of, because we think not only does it help our employee morale, but it really does speak to the fact that our board and this commission puts their money where their mouth is as far as what we value. And what we really value in education is our educators and the staff that goes along with those. So you can see that salary and benefits makes up 79% of what will basically be a $102 million budget. You can also see that contracted services makes up 7%, supplies and materials 3%, utilities 3%, other charges 2%, and equipment and capital outlay 6%. One reason I always like to show this is just to let you know, for instance, that 6% is actually over $4 million of what we're projecting putting into capital outlay next year. But when you're dealing with how much we put towards salary and benefits, it's not a drop in the bucket to what we're putting in for our employees. So here's our budget highlights. We are funding step raises, which costs approximately $630,000. We're funding a 4% across the board raise for all salaried employees, which costs approximately $2.5 million. We have also matched or exceeded surrounding district scales, which cost us another $3.3 million. So total added to who we currently have employed, the people that are on our books right now, we are projecting adding $6,430,000 to our existing employees' salaries. On top of that, there were a lot of other additions to our salary lines for a multitude of reasons, but if you keep in mind that we had moved a lot of our employees over to the ESSER pot of money, which allowed us to free up money to do some really, really major projects in the system, and to add additional personnel for learning loss and learning acceleration. Well, part of TISA coming in so high, their intent is to be able to stabilize us so that we can keep a lot of those extra educational and instructional helps in our district. So $890,000 is what it's going to cost us to bring back the ESSER positions to general purpose. We also have several positions that are coming back from IDEA, and that is a federal project, about $315,000 for that. New positions due to growth in our ADM numbers, and learning loss acceleration goals that are TISA recommendations. That's costing approximately $1,232,000. PI instruction and operations staff, we expect that to be fully operational in FY24, and those positions are going to cost approximately $483,550. We are also funding a 6% health insurance increase. This has not been voted on yet, but that is what the state is projecting it will be. So we worked in $750,000 additional dollars to cover that. We've added an extra $100,000 to the copy maintenance and repair allocations sent to the schools at the beginning of the year. That number had not been increased since I've been at central office, and our schools really do need that for things like copy machines and just everyday, being able to run their daily operations. New bus contract recommendation, we put in $580,000 for that new contract. That's what we are recommending. Edgenuity is our virtual school platform. We have been paying for that out of ESSER. That's having to come back, and that's $161,492. We also built in $800,000 for our technology refresh. I believe you guys have been briefed on that technology refresh schedule, and this is the first year for that. We are also recommending funding over $4 million for capital outlay. That includes building improvements for buildings and grounds. A lot of this is what was turned in by our principals. We've got $212,500 allotted for transportation and technology. We've got undesignated general maintenance, and that's really controlled by Dr. Cash and Chuck McKay, our supervisor, for things that are either undesignated or for emergency items. We have our Bank of America energy payment in there at $424,549. And then for safety upgrades, we have actually recommended allocating $1,605,341. The complete capital outlay list has been vetted by both our school principals and the capital outlay committee, and that recommendation is included in this budget. So let's talk a little bit about fund balance. The undesignated fund balance is currently around 6.5%. We anticipate after our year-end roll to increase that to approximately 9.2%, which equates to $9,432,390. Funds 177 and 145, which I handed out when I got here today, these are not ones that you're used to looking at, but I at least, you will be voting on it, so I at least wanted you to be able to put your eyes on it. But as we near the completion of the construction phase of the PIE Center and move into full operation, we will need to close out Fund 177 and begin operating in Fund 145 after July 1. The budgets for both of these funds are included for your review and questions. The balanced budgets presented today are a collaboration of many stakeholders. Thank you to Dr. Cash and the Board of Education for their hard work and willingness to make some very bold financial decisions for the betterment of our employees and school district. Thank you to the County Commission, the Mayor's Office, the Trustee's Office, and Assessor's Office for working together to support education and be good stewards of taxpayer money. I'm also very grateful to the state for increasing our state funding by approximately $13 million. And I would like to thank my staff for their incredibly hard work during this year's budget process. I truly could not have done it without them. And that concludes the PowerPoint, and we are ready to take any questions or anything that you'd like to share with us.
Thank you. The ESSER money, where are you at on the ESSER money? Because it has deadlines, right?
It
Like
does.
ours.
Ellen, I'm going to let you answer that one.
Hey, Ellen. Yeah, facing the wrong direction. ESSER 2 and ESSER 3, we are actually going to have almost pretty much fully expended out by June 30. The deadline for ESSER 2 is June 30, and ESSER 3 is in fiscal year 24 at the end of the year, but we do not anticipate having any funds left because we did spend so much of that on the PIE Center.
So basically, there's no risk of having to turn the money. Is it if you don't have it?
Oh, no.
I'm just saying, because
we will be giving no money back to the federal.
we talked about this in finance. You got basically the Finance and Education Committee here. The same thing is on that, but just for the record, so to speak. On one of your slides, you talked about security. I think it was like 1.6 million or something that you had in there. Is that something that you're doing because it's the right thing to do, but it's a local decision? Or is that something that's coming from the governor's office? Because he's made a big deal out of security.
It is actually us doing the right thing and knowing that it needed to be done. From my understanding, from what the governor has already put out there, Bradley County had already covered the majority of that, one of them being SRO officers. And we had also taken care of locks. The things that we added were recommendations from a review of all of our schools. And this was there was, you know, of course, we had the money. We always say safety is our first priority. So we recommended to the board to put these safety measures in place. But they most likely will be becoming recommendations by the governor. My understanding from the extra safety money that's coming in is it would match our current safety grant, which is around 190, is that about 200,000. So we are expecting about 200,000 in addition, which if those come in, we still have some things on here like the 3D glass, the 3M glass for bulletproofing and things like that. And then if we could be allowed to cover any of this, we would we'd reimburse. So there are some smaller things that we're hoping to use the extra money from. That is a one-time money that they're sending. The SROs are recurring money.
Right. Well, I applaud you on making that decision. We can't sit on our laurels on that, but I didn't know if the governor, because he's making a big deal out of it, was basically saying that that's what you had to do. On that same note with TISA, this new funding formula, you and I kind of chatted about it, but so they're giving a lot more money, but are they also giving a lot more mandates that you have to spend it a certain way? Because it's kind of like, we give you $100, but I'll take back 99.
Yes, sir. So if you noticed, out of ESSER, there were several positions that we were mandated to employ. So those had to come back, or you were supposed to make those decisions to maintain what you could maintain. There are also those unique learning needs that had to be supported. So they allotted money for economically disadvantaged, and there's a whole list of those. They are checking our budget. We're actually turning into the state pieces of our budget that guarantee that we are putting that money to use for students, and we're not doing things like, as they said, don't go build an athletic building when you should be supporting students. So there were expectations, and so we have to send in back to them through Title I and some budgeting what we've done with that money, and specifically looking at those unique learning needs.
So let me, this is a higher level question. Cindy and I were up in Nashville, I guess, when we first heard about TISA. What are they trying to accomplish with this? We know that BEP wasn't the best thing in the whole world, but it is what it is. But what are they trying to accomplish with this?
In my personal opinion, they're trying to accomplish giving school systems money to support learning and to try their very, very best to upkeep some of their buildings with some minor. We can't build new buildings with this, but basically to say you can no longer say, well, we didn't have the money to do that. Now they're asking, well, we gave you $13 million. Why are you still not hiring enough teachers, or why are you still not hiring enough support staff?
So with BEP, you had like your first number, and then you had a month later a new number, and then you had yet another number after the budget presentation to us and to all that. I mean, it was always truing up or fine tuning. Is that how TISA is going to work as well? That state will say, fine tune it again.
But it's going to be an average of all of the months. Each month now they are pulling your attendance and your membership and your average daily attendance. Whereas before it would be like there were five. There were 5 times they would look at it. Now they're looking at it monthly, and then at the end of the year that they're looking at every month. So. For instance, if I've got 75 students in a 3rd grade classroom those first 20 days, if those 75 don't stay with me, they're not waiting any of the months anymore. Prior to that, they would wait the months. There's no wait.
The TISA money that you project here will change by the time we get to July 1.
As a matter of fact, it's very similar to BEP as far as how it's sent to us, because in big bold letters across it, it will say April estimate.
Yeah, that's what you always say.
And it's basically just saying that you can't count on it yet. But the good news is that we've gotten 3 estimates so far. They have all gone up. None of them have gone down, which I think is a really good sign that it's probably not going to be less than what we're projecting, but I think it'll be close.
I just want to 2 more, and then I'll
just one thing, Commissioner Blake. The other thing I would tell you is we had an increase of over 200 students. So when you're increasing like that, and most of it was honestly in our elementary schools, which means it's going to push into your middle and then push into your high. So that's one of the reasons that we have maintained those estimates, is that our numbers have stayed on the increase versus the decrease. There are some districts out there whose estimates went down because their membership is showing that it's going down.
200, correct me if I'm wrong, 200 new students, your grand scheme of things, not that much, right?
Well, it starts to hurt when you don't have classrooms.
Okay,
No, but in the,
I come as not knowing.
in the grand schemes of team, that is actually considered, growth. So now with those 200 students, they're expecting me to hire teachers to cover that growth. So, they'll send me growth money, which we received. We did receive growth money. So it does impact the funding because of the funding formula. They have not changed the class size ratios. So you still have to maintain those class sizes.
So I didn't mean
Yeah.
that the wrong way, but 200, and then where I was going with it is relative to our city's rent. I mean, if you grow 200 and they grow 200, then that means a lot more to them
Yes.
than it does
That is
you.
correct.
So,
And that's a very good point, and I didn't bring that up with that slide when we were talking about ADA, but we talked about this with the board the other night. So, on the ADA, our weighted ADA went up by, I think, 203 kids, which is really good. Cleveland's ADA went up by 207 kids, which is almost exactly what you just said, 200 each. But because our piece of the pie is normally 2/3, just those 4 kids made a difference of 0.33%. So it's amazing
the
how
split,
just
in the-
such
in
a
the split.
little
In the split.
change can make a difference.
yeah. All right, 2 more, and I promise I'll be quick. The 630,000 that you're funding in your step plan, is there a percentage that you go by in order to get to that 630?
Well, typically, yes. We usually count about a percent.
1 point?
It's usually a percent. It's going to be really close. But this year, because of how it kind of happened, without just laying it out there, but we kind of had to work backwards this year because we wanted to get to a certain point where we were competitive with surrounding districts. So when we went that way, we actually went ahead and rolled everybody, if that makes sense. Like the way we set our payroll up is we have Excel spreadsheets for every line item, and every person's in there. So typically, if I use a 1%, that's going to be really close because not only if you were to roll it, then you take into account how many retirees you think you're going to have. So let's say we had 20 people retire, and we rehire them primarily with low end of the scale people. Well, that's about $200,000 that would save the district. So when I take all of that into account, 1% is going to be really close to what it is if I actually roll everybody and key the scale back in. But this year we actually rolled everybody and topped it back in. So the 630 is maybe a little bit more accurate than a 1%, but 1% holds true most of the time.
I was just wondering what your general percentage was that you go by. Okay, last question on the first round.
First round.
No, he's not.
Sales tax, you got 1,151,307 increase. And I remember our conversation last year. Obviously, that's pretty good.
Yes.
You're optimistic on the sales tax. Depends on a lot of variables on that, but your fund balance is healthy enough to handle that if it doesn't come into where you need it to be. I assume that's your strategy.
That's correct.
All right.
But I will say, the last 4 years, we've underestimated every year.
We just don't know
on
what
that.
year
We
it's
keep
gonna
thinking-
plateau.
We keep adding to it, and it keeps overperforming. So, I know eventually that's going to stop. But yes.
That's what they want.
I
mean,
know.
Yeah.
But we do have a plan. We're very conservative in our budgetings because, especially since COVID hit, things are very unpredictable. Things like, we were so sure sales tax was going to bottom out when COVID hit.
Right.
But we didn't know that the federal government was going to bail people out, which really increased sales tax. Instead of it going down, it went up. So
Right.
those are things we can't possibly predict.
But what
But-
they're trying to do now is the price of goods and services that are at the retail level, trying to bring those prices down. And sales tax is a percentage of the total sales.
Correct.
So they're trying to basically cool the market,
I
so
do
to
think
speak.
they are
But
trying to
I don't
do
know when they're
that.
going to be successful. That's all I have.
think that.
So
The-
I have a
I think that buying has already greatly slowed, but what we are buying, we're having to pay so much more for. Sales tax is still staying high.
So I have a question related to Fund 145,
Okay.
and it's in the account number 44120. under the lease and the CAM. So the $6,050 for the lease, is that what you expect to lease, like for special events in the next year, or what is that?
You answer that, Ellen.
No, the lease amount is actually a memorandum of understanding with a couple of nonprofits that are in one of our spaces that do have leases. So that is what we did not project out any of the usage agreement for the event spaces because we just don't have a way to predict what that's going to be for next year. So once we get those funds in, we'll amend at that time.
Okay, and what is the CAM?
The CAM is our common area maintenance, and all tenants right now are paying common area maintenance. There's 9 of them. So that's the money that we expect to collect on the 9 tenants that are currently in the building.
Okay, all right, thank you. Commissioner Winters?
I want to talk about the step raises. You have a step raise coming, and you also have a 4% coming. As you know, the governor has really pushed a goal that everybody makes $50,000 somewhere along the way. I think Hamilton County's done the same thing. So where do we stand with that goal
Right.
that everybody, and of course, we're talking about 4% on whatever their rate has been. Okay.
So,
And then the step is a percent, I think we're talking
Right.
about. And the,
so
where are we?
thank you for that question. And that's kind of a 3-part answer almost because, again, we started in a different way this year than we've ever done before. Normally, we start with where we are. We add the percent for a step, and then whatever amount the board recommends for percentage, I add that. So you're going from beginning to end. This year, we started with the end. We knew where we wanted to get to,
Yeah.
and then we worked backwards. So it was very challenging in a way because I didn't have my base to start with. So the board and Dr. Cash's recommendation was to try to start a teacher with a bachelor in zero at 50,000. Okay. Now at that 50,000. There is no 4% on top of the 50,000. That is the end, the beginning and the end on that one. But then when we had to look at the rest of the scale, there was no, if you look at surrounding districts, the best way I could describe it is it was not completely equal in any way. There was no percentage I could apply that would work. There was no flat amount I could apply that would work. So it almost looked like an upside down bell curve in the fact that they loaded it heavy on the front end and they loaded it heavy on the back end. And that's exactly what we did as well. But we were determined that no one would receive less than a 4% raise. Okay, so there's a lot of, I know that's confusing. It was confusing when I was doing it, but we wanted to make sure 4% is the highest percentage raise I think that we've given since Dr. Cash has been here and since I've been in this position. That's a good raise in and of itself, a 4%. But because we also wanted to be able to compete with our surrounding districts, we took those scales and matched them or exceeded them. And when I say exceeded, you could probably put the scales side by side and they would look identical. But keep in mind, we pay 100% of single insurance. They do not. So if you add that together, the package is actually a little higher. And does that answer your question? But we did get to the 50,000. We had to get there, I think, by 2026. And this board and Dr. Cash recommended going ahead and get there this year. You want to, you're welcome to.
Yeah. Well, first with your attendance, it's a little misleading because you have average daily attendance, which means you've got people in the seat, but the attendance is weighted. So it's weighted through CTE programs. It's weighted in multiple ways. So a lot of it depends on the unique learning need of that student as to how it weights. But overall, we're very competitive. Like Susan said, when you average it out, they were four kids ahead of us, and that's with all the weights in there. So we remain pretty strong. It kind of goes back and forth a little bit, but one or two students can sway it, and it really depends on the weight.
Not
No,
just special needs.
It's everything.
But for instance, I'm sorry.
That's okay.
But for instance, an ag student almost gets counted twice. Like, so so that could make up your 200 right there, just if you had agriculture students. And that's why it's so critical. It's not just having kids in the seats. We have to do that. But you also have to have them coded correctly. Correct.
Hey, I just wanted to ask a question about my phone several weeks ago was blowing up by bus contractors. Are bus contractors happy?
Well, what I can tell you is it's the largest increase they've had. Probably, I know, even larger than prior to us. And according to our former transportation, it's the biggest increase they've ever seen since they've been contractors in Bradley County. So I would probably tell you cannot satisfy everyone, but the majority of them are pleased that we actually paid attention, because they're a unique and valuable part of our school system. So it's pretty strong.
And correct me if I'm wrong, Dr. Cash, but you all brought them in and met with them.
Yes, ma'am.
And there were gives and takes on both sides. They brought some things to the table that they wanted to, and I don't know if you want to go into that,
Sure.
but
So one of the pieces that I think is extremely important is that through we asked them for information on fuel mileage and maintenance and some other things, so that we could begin to work and get a good idea of where we were. So in this contract, in specifically, they have a $5,000 stipend for each route that they run, and that's never been given. And I applaud the board for moving in that direction. They also had an increase in per seat and mileage with that. Typically with gas, like if gas we changed it and recommended changing through the business department to increase the gas, but then to move our overage to $5. So if it goes to $5 per gallon, then we would have to kick in more money for them. So we changed a little bit of that. We had been paying them twice or three for overage.
What do you mean?
We had been paying overage. No, at the end of like a semester.
Yes.
They requested that we move that to monthly, so we chose to do that as well based on what their input was. What I would tell you is this is a very, very great contract with more money than we've ever been able to give them, and we do appreciate them.
When the bus drivers and contractors called me, I told them, I said, you might want to be talking to Dr. Cash and the school board, because I always try to
Yeah.
stay in my lane on stuff like that.
We
So,
appreciate that.
Thank you so much.
Yes, I was listening to Dr. Cash. I'm more concerned about this 200 extra kids. Are we talking about any plans for that, or exactly what you plan on doing with those 200 extra? Or are they permanent? Are they all county kids, or where are we getting all these kids from?
Well, they keep coming, and they are, honestly, most of them, truthfully, are from out of state, and they're moving into our area. And I've got an increase at the majority of my schools. We are, I think it's next on the list to talk about doing a capacity study. But we are looking at what do we do next, to be honest with you, and that comes in that capacity study. But they are the majority of them are ours. I'll take Waterville Elementary, for instance, which she's got over 640 kids. There are no out-of-zone kids there. So we're starting to hit those areas where we literally can't take out-of-zone kids, because we're at capacity, full capacity, which she really is.
Are you thinking about, before you get to capacity, looking at these out-of-zone kids?
Mr. Alford, when we get to that point, we'll have to look at everything, but the first thing we always do is to look and see if we've got one area that is overloaded and another area that's not. So we look at rezoning first, and once we start looking at rezoning, that usually alleviates what we need, but we're almost at the point where I don't want to speak because I haven't seen the capacity study, and I don't think it's going to be ready for the board until June. But we look at every avenue. For instance, like at Waterville, she simply could not take out of zone kids because we literally were full.
I guess the point I'm trying to get to, if you have a kid at Waterville that is zoned there and you're already full, what are you gonna do?
I think that's a scenario we'd have to look at the time, because if they've been there 3 or 4 years, I would not feel good about making them go back to their home school.
I'm talking about a new kid coming in.
Again,
Zoned for Waterville and they're full, where's that kid gonna go to school?
that would be a parental decision.
Safety grades, I think Mr. Mylan got onto that some. You got any idea of exactly where you're gonna spend that 1.6? Any ideas on that yet?
You have the safety in front of you, and you can go down the list. It's everything from securing front entrances to redoing some key fobs and mag locks, replacing. I mean, there's a whole piece. There's at each school there was something different, but it's everything from lighting to doors to fencing, double doors and securing hallways. There's just a tremendous amount that was entered. Everything from radios to it's a full gamut. Our biggest expense is honestly fencing around a specific clear fencing around the high schools. That is not that you can't cut and you can't slice. We still have those, but it's all there. So it's all spelled out where we're spending that money. Well, it brought in $13 million more money. Yeah.
Where that's gonna be spent, pretty much, or
Yes.
how it can be spent, I
Yes,
guess
sir.
you might say. That's all I have right now.
Okay, are there other questions related to the budget? Commissioner Winters?
TISA, new funds, and the curriculum. Sorry, I'll go back over this. The TISA is what I'm interested in, and once, and I know you sit on curriculum boards, I think, Madam Superintendent, so I'm comfortable with what we're teaching. I'm not having concerns there. But with TISA providing this additional fund, I'm sure the board will regulate with you what's being taught in the classrooms, but is there to be a pressure where there would be this type of money coming in and then a pressure to teach X area that we probably would not like to teach? Would we get caught in that funding base coming in?
No,
And then
sir.
we're in that.
And they continue to say it is not a spending formula. Am I saying it's not a spending formula? But it's a funding formula. Districts would make those decisions, but we do have to look at those unique needs. This does not push curriculum. It does not do anything, but we are required by state law to teach the Tennessee standards. And if the Tennessee standards are not being taught, that is up to that individual district and principal in that building to monitor that.
Commissioner Blake, any other questions?
So on Fund 177, you got on this document in the estimated capital fund 2022, 2023, 570,926. If 177 is going to go away, where would that fund balance go?
Those funds will be spent down. We have a little bit more to spend with TU Parks.
So it's not going to go to another fund. You're just going to
Not at this point. No.
you're just going to spend it until you get down to zero.
That's the plan.
Um,
Yeah, well, there.
We're estimating being less That could change. That is a pure estimate right now of what we think is not going to be spent. So that would go over to 145 if that's still there, right?
And it's on your 145 sheet.
It's showing in both places. So that's what we estimate will be transferred over.
Your capital projects committee and I saw that, did they have a list of what they, I know you said the principals submitted what their wish list is, but
Well,
was it more on the maintenance side or
yes,
new
yeah,
construction?
maintenance submits, of course, they're looking at the heat, air, all of those types of things, the big things, and and a lot of safety. We have our safety officer who looks at all the safety things and pieces like that, and then the principals submit. Those are reviewed by the committee to see what's our top thing, safety. So we look at the safety, and then we start looking at what the principals are requesting, and we try to look at at least their first three. Sometimes if they do not, if they are not in line with something that is, like it's some weird, I'll just be honest with you, sometimes it's weird and I go, what is that? But we do try to look at their first, second, and third and then go back and assure us of what that actually is.
I guess what confuses me a little bit is you got 1.6 going into security. So if they requested something that's more in the security, it should fall under that.
Well, a
But if
lot of
they-
the security was already in their request, and I just pulled out we're not getting all that money from the state for that. That is actually coming from our budgeted money.
Right, but what I'm talking about is the money that you've allocated for capital projects. So I look at them as two different lines or two
Right.
different pots. So you got security money, 1.6, and if a principal says, I want bulletproof glass or whatever, it gets paid out of this. But if they want new carpet or better lighting, it would fall into the capital project.
Yep.
Am I
yes.
right? So that list there, that's submitted to you.
Yes.
And what, is it, you said it's all, there's no new construction. In other words, nobody wants a new room or a new bath.
Oh, I'm sure they do, but
Well, did they put it in writing?
yeah. No, sir. What we were.
The reason why I'm asking is because on our side, if we have to fund it, then we'll get with the mayor and
So
come up
so
with the
far,
best way
right.
to make sure that
So
we
far,
expedite our
right
money.
now, what we're waiting on is that capacity study.
Yeah.
And we are also waiting on, most definitely the grant to come through for the science wing.
Yes.
We checked on that today. Our she may have checked on it last week. I'm not sure. And they're like, it's a big request, but y'all are fine. We just don't have, because we're working with the federal government, them saying they're going to tell you in October or they're going to tell you in November. So we don't know when they're going to notify us so that we can start building, but we believe it to be spring of 24.
Spring of 24. So, and I'm not going to hold you to it, but if we get to the spring of 24, or maybe even the summer of 24, and still nothing, I mean, have you guys thought about a date where federal government just said, they haven't said anything, that we want to go ahead and go forward with this, or will we just wait it out and because I know we don't want to give up $10 million.
No.
But at some point,
I
if
think
the
if-
federal government's going to be
Right.
lackadaisical, we want to move forward with
I
this.
think if we had the indication it was not going to be funded, that's when I would want to come back and say, talking to the board and talking to you guys, and I think we're going to need to move ahead. They usually, though, we're in the time frame of late fall, early spring when they usually do the notifications, and we're like constantly bothering them. So I think that would be a discussion we'd have to have with the board and with the commission if we felt like we needed to move forward.
Thank you.
Commissioner Alford.
Yes, I have another question referencing your busing situations. The athletic teams, I know some of them have their own buses, but occasionally they have to use one of these bus contractors, my understanding it used to. Was anything discussed in that referencing any priorities or monies or anything that the bus drivers would charge athletic department?
No, sir, because they are independent contractors, so they have to work that out. What I am suggesting within our budget is that we put aside some funding for teams that maybe made it to the state finals, that we could help supplement some of that. But if they are working with those contractors, they're independent from us. So the contract, they work that out with the schools.
I'm glad to hear that you put some money in there for teams that go to state championship, because usually if you're familiar with football or basketball or anything, it usually costs the school to go to a state championship
Yes, sir.
game.
Yes, sir.
Because state TWSAA doesn't reimburse anywhere close to what the cost is. So I guess you hopefully have some money in your budget that would help those state teams go to the state tournament, because that's a big burden on high school athletics. Have you discussed athletics with, in your budget a whole lot?
Well, what we have done in the past and what's recommended to this board is that we have in the budget $15,000 for athletics at each high school and $5,000 for the middle schools. It does have to be spent on athletics. They can't move it anywhere else, and that is actually things for their discretion as long as it's related to athletics in that arena.
Is that not the figure that you had quite a few years?
Mhm.
Is there any talk amongst the board members to raise that a little bit?
No, sir, not to my knowledge.
Okay. I would like to at least look into that side of it, because if you look at the expenses nowadays for travel for athletic teams, I don't know that the athletic budgets can carry that fully, you know.
So Commissioner Blake has
Last one
more
question.
question. I'm going to
Well,
hold him
this one
to it.
because I want some ammo. And you know why. I'm looking at over the time from 21, 22, 22, 23, now the proposed 23, 24. Am I correct in saying that we are now budgeting our Bradley County schools as a whole over $100 million for the first time?
That is correct for the first time. Yes.
So our per pupil expenditure is getting better and better and better and better.
Yes, sir.
We do more with.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Item number B, capacity study update. Dr. Cash?
So I think we've bounced all over this one. So what I can tell you is the capacity study itself is only looking at our elementary schools right now. As of a couple of weeks ago, there were 2 schools left to review, and Prospect and is it Waterfall? Maybe Prospect and Waterfall. I'm not sure. And then they were also working with us to find about where the growth areas were hitting. When I talked to the architect actually this past week, he is projecting that he will have the full study done in June. And so that's what we're looking for, is to dive into that study in June. Just an overall view, I can tell you that there are some schools that in order to expand, you would have to expand the gym and the cafeteria, because those core features are not large enough for an expansion based on fire code and things like that.
So we'll schedule a meeting sometime late in summer before
Yes, ma'am.
school starts back to review that. Okay, any other questions related to capacity study? Mr. Winters?
You have reviewed the population, I'm sure, of all the school districts.
Yes, sir.
Could you outline where most of the growth is coming from? Is it north, south, east, west?
In all honesty, the growth is all over the county. There's not one end that's higher or lower than the other. It looks like, I don't have an elementary school that did not grow. My middle schools are in a better shape to handle growth. But there's no rhyme or reason for me to say, oh, I need to build here or I need to be here, in that without actually seeing not just the growth areas, but what the schools can hold and what we could do. I would be reluctant to say we're going to look at this, or this. You're growing on both ends.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the middle.
Can I ask one more? How did you do your study? Did you work with the contractors? Did you deal with the different agencies that were looking at growth?
So the board made the decision to hire an architect who is familiar with doing those studies, and he had just finished a study in outside of Knoxville, and they are capacity studies. You can go into much more depth than ours is going into, but this is a look at the structure and capacity in the schools, what the rooms are being used as of now, whether we can add or not add. It looks at, even the facilities, the underground facilities, the gas, the sewers. It looks at everything. And then they also got information from the city, actually the city and the county planners to see where where they've already sold land for,
Good.
subdivisions. So
Yeah.
it's a pretty big study. But I'm not real sure where we're not growing. I mean, in the county, what I'm saying is every time I look or go down something, I'm seeing land sold for a subdivision or.
But to follow up with Commissioner Alford's questions about the 100 at Waterville, with the schools that you have, the architectural design of those schools, are most of them adaptable to adding us? You know, where we have many of our schools, we knew exactly where it was going to be.
That's
the
what this
addition.
study will tell us
Yeah.
as to what we can and
great.
can't, what is feasible and what is not feasible.
Excellent.
So is there any unfinished business or any other item that anyone would like to discuss? Commissioner Alford?
I'm not gonna break it up. How do we compare teacher-wise salaries now with you talked about surrounding areas, but how are we comparing? Are we within range of most of the schools around here? Or are we above most of them, or where are we?
Yes, we are at or above every surrounding district that we have checked on, and without naming names, I'm sure I know who
Understand
you're
that,
thinking,
yeah.
but, we actually, the one that we thought was the highest, we have mirrored that scale. The only difference is we're also paying about $900 extra toward health insurance that particular high scale is not doing.
Right.
Now that's employee only, but
Kinda
that's the
like that.
majority of our employees have that.
That's good to know. Thank you.
Commissioner Winters?
I'd just like to say your team is excellent. These ladies that you brought with you and your team, to present this way for generalists like some of us to take a look at, it's been very good, and I appreciate what you do.
I do just want to, again, the business office at our system, they are excellent. And sometimes I come in and I say, like when I said, I think I want to go to 50,000 now, they're like, but the work that's done is thorough. It takes into so many considerations, and communicating with the board and the board support is just often not found, and the support from this commission. Our goal is to try our very best to bring you a balanced budget, and and the board will meet tomorrow to discuss and hopefully pass the budget, and then it will come to you. But it is our goal to bring you a balanced budget.
And I just want to echo what Commissioner Winters said. I appreciate the work that Susan and Ellen and you, Dr. Cash, do every day to take care of the students in Bradley County, and you all truly are making a difference in those students' lives.